and I'm just going to talk to you for a little bit. Because I think there are things actually to talk about in this case. Nicholas Sheley here is innocent of all the charges until, and only until, you determine that the state has proven him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And despite 5 or 6 days of testimony, despite 5 or 6 times the evidence is repeated in a closing argument, there are questions still that haven't been answered. And that the evidence presented in this case hasn't answered all the questions. And that evidence did not overcome the presumption of innocence. In short, ladies and gentlemen, the state has not met its burden of proving Mr. Sheley guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I want to address some of the evidence that you've been presented throughout this case. This is evidence that I told you during my opening statement that I expected that the state would present to you, and they have. First, let's talk about the uncharged crimes the state has presented to you. That they have presented evidence of, almost a day's worth of evidence to you, that involves the theft of Robert Carrier's car. Now again, he's not charged with that offense. The fact that Nicholas Sheley stole a car, does it make it more likely that he murdered Robert Reed? No. The fact that he led the police on a car chase after he stole the car, does it make it more likely that he murdered Robert Reed? No, it makes it more likely that he stole a car. The point is that this is not evidence that he murdered anyone. It's evidence intended to paint Mr. Sheley in a bad light. That if he committed these crimes of theft of a car, then he must be a criminal. And that he's a criminal more likely to have committed these other charged crimes. But this is an inference, a takeaway from you, that is not the law. And it's exactly the opposite of what you are allowed to do in this case. When you hear the jury instructions, you will hear that I believe that you will be instructed by the judge that these other uncharged offenses may only be used by you for the limited purposes related to motive, and flight, and intent. Not that he's just a criminal. I believe you would agree with me, I don't see how this evidence, this ton of evidence of these other crimes that we received about reveals anything about the charged crimes here. The evidence says a lot about the uncharged crimes, but sheds no light at all on what this trial is really about, and I suspect you see it that way. I want to talk to you about lab technicians, for there is more to talk about here. You heard a great deal of testimony from what I would call forensic technicians. Now, the state would call them experts, or they would call them scientists. I think they would try to call themselves technicians, or excuse me, scientists or experts, but I dispute this. These individuals are essentially trained by their respective police agencies to run certain prescribed routines on certain prescribed samples. They aren't conducting experiments like we would expect scientists to do. They are following a road procedure like we would expect technicians to do. They fervently believe the theories behind what it is that they say they do. Well, they had better, right? They had better because that's what they get paid to do and paid to say, almost scripted. These technicians almost robotically report what in the beginning and what came out in the end. And they all say, well, this is universally accepted scientists amongst the people in their field of other technicians. But you heard so little, if anything, about the science behind these procedures and whether the science actually supports the procedures and the results that were reported as opinions. And of course, I start here with Tom Murchie, who testified that he doesn't give his opinions about what these blood patterns show until he gets all the facts about the case, and then he takes that to what he has there. It's kind of like going to a fortune teller and telling the fortune teller everything about you. Well, they're going to be able to craft a prophecy that fits you, now doesn't it? Frankly, my question is this science? Well, he says it is, right? So therefore it must be. But what do scientists do? What do scientists do? They make a hypothesis. They go back to the laboratory. They experiment to prove that their hypothesis is true. And did Mr. Murchie do that? No, he didn't. Did Mr. Murchie take back his 200 hours of training and apply that in the laboratory to prove what he believes what happened in Mr. Reed's house? No. You know, I went to law school for 3 years, and they still say that I'm only practicing law. 3 weeks of training and 6 times in court, it's hard to give that any weight.